we are very appreciative of the sponsorship. Without the sponsorship, it would not be possible to also provide the discounted rates, especially for trainees and students, and also to be able to have it in this beautiful space and the delicious food that you're all enjoying. So we have our sponsors that I'm just going to scroll through here, our premier sponsors, executive, associate, and supporting sponsors. Please make sure to go visit the vendor booths in Ski-U-Ma just right behind. Very exciting setup there with lots of different innovations that they can share with you. Also wanted to share, we have multiple innovation centers as part of the University of Minnesota. And we have the Institute for Engineering and Medicine, which is the umbrella organization, and we have basically medical school and engineering that partner together to allow for a lot of the partnership and workforce development that's happening at the university. And underneath that umbrella, we also have different centers that are under that consortium. We have the Earl Bakken Medical Devices Center. I see a lot of people walking in. Come on in to the front here. Don't be shy. And so we also have the Earl Bakken Medical Devices Center, where many of you know are hosting this conference. There's a lot of opportunities if you're interested as an outside company or even an entrepreneur or innovator to be able to do prototyping, preclinical and clinical work and get access to the university for medtech development and commercialization. So we have different programs such as the Innovation Fellows Program. Here's the QR code if you're interested, but that allows you opportunity to learn more about coming in and doing similar to what you might see with other kind of entrepreneur programs at universities. You're able to do a needs assessment and to develop the innovation with some of the fellows moving on to having startup companies or licensing deals with the IP they create. We also have a new program called Endure. This is a program where we're helping startup companies. Those could be companies from the external to the university or faculty staff companies from within the university to be able to get support to help build their company up to a level. Think of it as a tech incubator to be able to build your company up to a level to get that initial fundraising or Series A. Please don't be shy. You can come into the front area here. There's more seats up in the front. And then we also have ATPO Bio, which is another center that's underneath the umbrella of Institute for Engineering and Medicine. It's a bit different from what you're used to seeing in a MedTech conference, but the idea is that bio and cell cultures and organoids are going to become very critical for this fusion of MedTech and bio that's coming together. Another center institute, which you're all familiar with, is the Visible Heart Lab. It's pretty much a one-of-a-kind, unique center in the University of Minnesota that allows space in cardiac anatomy and physiology. Enormous amount of training opportunities have happened through this center. If you're interested, there will be guided tours today and tomorrow, 5:15 to 6:30, so you can go to the front desk to find out more information. Now, I do want to say I like to have a fun time, and the reception is always a great place to meet new people, to have good food and drinks and reception. So please make sure tonight we will have our food and networking at 5 to 7:30. We're also going to allow the poster sessions to continue on. We had over 100 poster submissions, and 80 of them are being presented here. And so please, half are today, half are tomorrow. Make sure you attend the poster session. A lot of great innovation happening, and that'll be from 3 to 6 p.m. That will, merge with the food and networking session. And we've also got the student design showcase and the NSF ATPO Bio poster session. Tomorrow, we will have our 5-minute pitch competition. And just so you know, we'll have awards for that. That's the last session of the day tomorrow. And these are the 8 companies out of 80 plus submissions that were rigorously reviewed and judged. And these are the 8 that made it to the top that we'll be presenting tomorrow. I just want to make a reminder, tomorrow we are starting a bit earlier than usual, and so that's why I'm showing you this. We're going to start at 7:30 a.m. because we wanted to have an additional special funding session, keynote by Dr. Tyler Best from ARPA-H. And so you won't want to miss that. It's DARPA mixed in with NIH for the future of how research should be done in our society, and he'll be able to provide information on that tomorrow morning, followed by our keynote speaker, Dr. Peter Shulam from Johnson & Johnson MedTech. So and we have our keynote speaker also tomorrow at lunch. We have the privilege and honor to have the FDA CDRH director who will be in person giving the keynote talk tomorrow at lunch. So with that, this gave enough time for people to get their lunch and trickle in. With that, I'm going to hand over to Art Erdman, who's going to run our keynote lunch session.
So I'm going to be really, really rude and ask people to stop talking. And it's really disappointing because a lot of what goes on in this conference that's positive is all this interfacing between people, meeting new people and so forth. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. Thank you so very much for coming. We're so excited for you to share with us some highlights of 25 years. A quarter of a century, wow, it's gone really fast. And we have the program here in two portions. The first portion, about half an hour. The three musketeers here, Paul, Will, and I, we've sort of most years been the executive committee for the conference. So we thought we would share some highlights over the years a little bit of data, but you know, what we learned and so forth. And then we're going to have our distinguished panel after that. So please continue enjoying your food, and we will get started. So what we want to do is just briefly, because we could talk for hours and hours, you can imagine over 25 years, lots of things happen. How did it start? How did it grow? And did we learn anything from it? And, you know, I think it's going to be a little bit Minnesota-centric, so for all of you that are from out of town, I apologize, but at the same time, there's some learning lessons. I think that as you're trying to develop your own ecosystem and you're developing your own research and innovation programs and all that, I think we're going to present it in a sense that please learn from us. And we've always kind of had that attitude about things. So the DMD conference starting in 2001 did not start in a vacuum. And I'm going to use the word vacuum twice at least in my remarks here. Things happened before that, and so the first part of the presentation, we want to talk about that. So really in the 60s, a group of individuals, Perry Blackshear, Ken Keller, actually former president, he sent his regrets. He had a conflict. He would have been here. Henry Buchwald. Henry, did you come today? I think he was going to show up too. And a couple of other people started biomedical engineering. It was initially a graduate program in the 60s. When I arrived in the 70s or so, it was already going. So there was a great foundation there. I'm highlighting on the left-hand side a task force that a number of us were fortunate to be part of. And that task force put out, and it was a government, university, industry task force. So seriously, what are we going to do about biomedical engineering? So the initial report, and by the way, I save everything, so sometimes it comes in handy. My wife doesn't like all my piles, but once in a while it gets... so this is the report, and then I was privileged with David Bendit out of the medical school to write the final set of recommendations a year later. And if you read through this report, it's amazing how it sort of set up a lot of things. It set up what 20 years later became the Bakken Medical Devices Center, but it also set up building a new building on the river, which was originally the Basic Science and Biomedical Engineering building, now Hasemo Hall. And the cool thing about that is this was really pushed by industry. So Ron Matacaria, who was the CEO of St. Jude, now Abbott, really pushed hard. And there were a number of companies, I think even including Honeywell and some others, that put in money. So there was reported about $12 million raised from corporate to really put a integrated program together. And it really was, in my mind, following the blueprint that this task force put together. I believe that Arne Carlson was the governor at that time, and Ron Matacaria went in and shamed our state government. He said, well, all these companies are putting in money, you should put in money too. So that really generated that building, and it's home of a lot of research and also Department of Biomedical Engineering. So you can see that there's some history there. That's sort of on the academic side. I'm going to turn it over to Paul Izio to talk about the surgery side of things.
Well, thanks a lot, Art. It's exciting to be here. It's exciting to see so many friends that have come to these meetings for 25 years. Thank you. But again, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. We had C. Walton here, who's considered the father of open heart surgery, that basically did the first open heart surgeries with direct visualization. And these surgeries were done right over in the Mayo building over there. In the basement were the preclinical research labs. And during that era, Dr. Wangenstein required all his surgeons to get PhDs. And so they are all in the research labs, and they were innovating. And that's what our legacy here in Minnesota. So again, if you want to be impressed, he started his undergrad at 16, entered medical school at 19, did a master's, and did his residency, was a field surgeon for 2 years during World War II in North Africa and Italy. The philosophical changes happens in the war that you can do open heart surgery. These surgeons come back, and that's what they pursued. Next slide, please.
Do you want to do his quote? His video?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yep. Oops.
All right. Here he is in the basement of Mayo building. It's where my lab is now. It's B172. He's doing preclinical research in the so-called dog labs. And again, these preclinical research studies were done when they developed the equipment to do open heart surgery, the bubble oxygenator, they used sterile tubing, they used the preclinical devices, walked upstairs to the OR, and that was it. It was a total different era back then. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we have Medtronic. When they had all this new equipment in the operating room, the university said, we better subcontract a small equipment repair company to get an engineer up in the ORs, because if anything goes wrong with the equipment, which included vacuum tubes, so maybe half the room knows what a vacuum tube is, they needed an engineer to repair it. So Earl, who did his undergrad here at University of Minnesota, electrical engineer, comes to the U, is up in the ORs, comes to help in the preclinical research lab, and then he develops the wearable pacemaker. Why don't you play the video? You're going to have to click it. Get the audio.
It worked before.
All right. Hopefully we'll get this to go. I guess while they're setting up, hopefully they're going to get the sound. They're all talking about bringing the wearable pacemaker. On the lower right, that's the one preclinical study done on a dog. So that day, Medtronic went from an equipment repair company to a medical device company. And that was the preclinical trial. The clinical trial started a couple hours later. So the story is that plan was to keep the dog alive for several weeks with the wearable pacemaker. Earl went home all excited that he just invented the first wearable pacemaker, one of the first battery-powered medical devices. Comes back the next day to see how the dog's doing. The dog's dead on the table. He asked what happened. Dr. Gott, who was a resident at the time, said, well, I came to the lab, saw the pacemaker was working great, took it off the dog, heart stops, put it on a young child in the ICU. So after 4 or 5 hours of testing, this is now keeping a child alive. Different era back then, but that's the day that Medtronic went from an equipment repair company to a medical device company. And if we look at the legacy of this room and the pedigree now of Medtronic, we can trace almost all the medical device companies in Minnesota back to Medtronic, back to the lab. Next slide, please. Oh, now we got it to work. We'll keep going. So if you look at my lab, I have the privilege to work down there every day. I'm inspired because this is where basically the birthplace of the medical device industry is in Minnesota, in the basement of the Mayo building. So it's an amazing, rich legacy. And again, it's an electrical engineer, an engineer working with a heart surgeon. So this clinical engineering collaboration starts in the basement, and this is what's going on in this room.
Thanks, Paul. So lots of stuff is happening within the university too. So this is a publication, IEM. John Bischoff is the current chair of IEM. Got a copy of that too. It's an amazing list of inventions within the university. It's a combination of those that are from engineering, science, and also medicine. So this is all precursor to the conference. This slide is important to me. The date on the Medical Alley poster is somewhere late 70s, early 80s, and I'll have to look it up sometime. But in Minnesota, and Dick Clark, who was one of the founders of MTS Systems, it's listed there, told me many times a story that we were the birthplace of the supercomputer between the Minneapolis area and western Wisconsin. And so all those people were high tech. And then when the medical device industry grew, we had a workforce that was ready for it, including, of course, people from the University of Minnesota. And there were a lot of companies that were already in place. You can see some of those on this famous poster. So the first Design of Medical Devices conference, I have something here that I want to read. So Will Durfee asked me, he said, well, do you have your original proposal? So what happened is that we had an opportunity to write a proposal for the Sesquicentennial Conference, which was in 2001. We're now 25 years later, amazing. So we had Mark Udoff was the president, so he said, well, I'm going to fund 12 conferences. So I actually have the poster from that. I don't have my proposal. I'm about 6 computers after that. But it's kind of interesting because this must have come out of the proposal, but it talks about celebrating the history, which we talked just a little bit about, current activity, research, methodology, relationships, business practices, public policy as it relates to nurturing medical device development today, projected needs in healthcare for medical devices and equipment, potential new technologies to change medical device development, including role of rapid prototyping. Well, we now call that 3D printing or different new manufacturing of medical devices, impact of molecular, cellular, tissue in device design. So the very first conference was dedicated to some of the same things that we are dedicated today. Will, you want to chat about this a little bit, or we can team on this? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So when we started and got the role, we were kind of thinking, well, what would make this activity a little bit different? Because there's many academic research conferences out there that all of us academics go to. There's many clinical conferences that clinicians go to, and then there are industry trade shows and advocacy organization, but there really wasn't anything around that attempted to blend all three. And so that was kind of what we wanted this event to be, and the very first year we sort of made that little dip of the toe in the water. But I think over the years, I think we've been pretty good, again, at being this unique type of event that brings together all of the entities and the parties that are needed to really exchange ideas on medtech innovation.
You know, and this lists some of the goals of the conference. We'll kind of go through this quickly, but it was meant to, as Will was saying, be a very broad conference that we would draw people from every potential facet of the medical device development area. First program, which I also have here. Will, do you want to chat about that a little bit?
So fortunately, you know, being in this region, you can call upon a lot of people. So after we got the go-ahead to do the conference, you know, if you were sitting around, oh boy, I guess we got to get going on this and find some people. So we called upon our friends in the area and also around the country to really think through what we should have. We had a day and a half, and it was all single session, so we couldn't really squeeze a bunch in. But you know, wanted to have that history part. So again, we had the former president of the University of Minnesota come in, Ken Keller, and talk about things. You know, but to show how we're different, we had a former United States senator come in, who was very instrumental in their time in the Senate in really moving ahead medical technology innovation, because the senator represented Minnesota and knew that that was a part of our history. Next slide, please. Then we had the future of medical devices, and one of the keynote speaker in that is Tim Lasky, who's sitting right down here. And Tim, I don't have my notes from what you said, but I am absolutely confident that you were, looking back, you were right on in terms of what the future of medical devices were. You know, in some of the sessions, it's kind of things are new and things stay the same. We had a session on biomems. You know, 10 years later, you had to call it nano, but if you look at the topics in that, you know, a lot of similarity. Session on imaging and advanced ultrasound imaging that still continues to be a hot topic. Stem cells, you know, maybe 50 years from now, we'll still figure out stem cells, who knows, but we had topics on that. John Bischoff led a session on cryomedicine, and to some extent, part of the foundations that form the current Engineering Research Center that now directs ATP Bio. You know, but it wasn't all those kinds of things. We covered entrepreneurship, and we covered policy. And if you look at this closing lunch on the future, we also had someone, our kid from industry, and a few folks from the academic as well, in order to really think about, okay, what is this appropriate ecosystem to move medtech innovation ahead? And then, Art, I guess since that first little scrappy event with 300 attendees, after which we all looked around each other and said, hey, this is pretty cool, we should do it again. What's happened?
Yes. So I also want to show you, this is, sorry, Steve Krauss, it's IT. We're now at the College of Science and Engineering, but this is an amazing publication. It's called the IT 400. So they decided to say, of all graduates from the College of Science and Engineering, how many companies have been started? of course, Medtronic's in here and everybody else. So they came up with 400, and they published this. And then they got phone calls and phone calls and phone calls. So it was more like 900 companies started, and this is quite a bit ago, and it's really interesting to look at because it's got time charts. And where companies, so here's Medtronic, and it's got 16 different companies that came out of Medtronic. So this is something that really helped us create our ecosystem. So we've grown, and some of these data I think are pretty impressive. The number of attendees and speakers, and some of this is actually not even up to date. One of the things that I want to point out as you're looking at this is there were over 60 other meetings that co-located with this conference. So that means they would be in a different room a day before or a day after. What I found in addition to that is particularly colleagues from Europe and Asia, they knew they were coming to Minnesota sometime in the spring, so they always came during DMD or IEM week also. So these meetings occurred, so let me just list a couple of them. So we had several Regulation 101 training courses, ASME V&V 40 arguably started here, a couple of NIH meetings, the Pediatric Consortium, which is still going. Cybersecurity had a couple of meetings here. United States Patent Office had a couple of side meetings. BioFab, BMES, Plastics, AMV. So the impact of the conference, I think, extends far beyond what we have here. So we've had lots of sessions. I'm told by Trish that this is under counting. I think we have 5 or 6 more global countries that have been at the DMD conference. A couple of years we actually emphasized international stuff. Whoops, this has a mind of its own. So these keynotes, Will, you're an amazing recruiter, getting great keynotes over the years. It's amazing, including even this morning and tomorrow. Live surgeries, Paul really have run those almost every year. There's been live surgeries, sometimes real live and sometimes piped in. If you go to a clinical conference, you see it all the time. If you go to an engineering conference, you don't. So here you can have a little bit of everything. We had the 510K last night. I pulled these slides because it shows that we usually are in earlier April, and there's some white stuff. I'm not sure what that is on the ground. We've had 10 DMD conferences, 5 in Europe, 3 in China, and 2 in Korea, and those sort of stopped with COVID, although we probably would be still doing some of that. So what are the lessons learned? And I want to speak about that a little bit, and maybe my colleagues will add in as well. So over on the bottom left, there's a guy, Bob Brunix. How many people have had a class or taught a class in Brunix Hall? Okay. So, you can get your a building named after you. And Bob, why don't you stand up as I'm talking here? Thank you for attending. So you can get a building named after you, but it's actually not that easy, I found out. It requires a little bit more. So a little known fact is that Bob and his wife, Susan, on weekends were laying brick on the east side of Brunix Hall to make sure they got the name on there. The other picture you can see, Dale and Frank are going to come up here shortly for the second half of the presentation, and there's Tim Lasky. I promised to put this up as a reminder for if you'd like to sign up for our fellows program. So Danny Sachs, you're somewhere here, and we have some of the fellows here. There you are. Thanks for coming. So the fellows class is closed. If you want to have any information on that, please ask. So what did we learn? Let me start with like the Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life. That is, where would we be if we didn't have DMD? Well, I would say that probably we wouldn't have the Bakken Medical Devices Center. And I want to acknowledge several other people. So Frank Frank Serra and the foundation upstairs, and Bob Brunix and Steve Crouch and Moscovi. I mean, they were champions for doing this interdisciplinary center, which I think has done some great things. So we wouldn't have the center probably because we wouldn't have picked up all of this momentum. So we wouldn't have had a fellows program, so we wouldn't have had 400 patent disclosures to the university, wouldn't have had 30 some odd startup companies, we wouldn't have had all these things. And who knows what else, so many things occur. I've had colleagues tell me, gee, you know, I met so-and-so from this company and now I have a contract. Well, that would never have happened. So to me, it's all about relationships, and it's all about trust. So you meet people enough times, you create trust. I think it's also about being a servant leader. So Will and Paul and I and others, you know, we do this for volunteer, and if we counted all our hours over 25 years, I don't know what that number would be. It's also about the ecosystem and building an ecosystem, and we've been very fortunate in Minnesota to have a wonderful one. We've reviewed a little bit of it today. But you know, if you, as your role in the ecosystem, if you kind of fail and let things go and get a little bit lazy, then that hurts not only you, but the whole ecosystem. So it's very important because it's a fragile thing. I think we all agree with that. You know, what we found in this conference is that fierce competitors can sit next to each other in sessions, and everybody learns and everybody builds on each other. And it kind of breaks down some of the barriers. I know we've got a couple of lawyers here. I see Jim in the back. Recommend not doing things, but you know, there's a lot of things we want to learn together. We want to raise all the boats at the same time, and this is the kind of conference that you can do that. So I'd also be remiss, you know, thanking the staff over the years, Jenny, Trish, and Alyssa, the first meetings, and so forth. Without a great staff, without collaboration with the university, without a great TechCom office and all those things, none of this really happens. Any other comments before we move to the next part of the, yes, please.
I just want to say thanks, everybody. I enjoy this meeting every year, and it's because I get to see all kinds of friends and colleagues and meet new people. So thank you. I've enjoyed it extremely well.
Okay, we're going to move, please, our panel, please come up. There we go. So I get to do more relaxing now because I'm just going to be asking questions, but I am going to introduce our panel, very distinguished. And it's kind of interesting. We started talking about this session, I don't know, September, October last year, and we were talking about who should be on the panel. And it's amazing. 2 or 3 people independently came up with the same number, same individuals. So it's a really special situation. So just briefly, and I think some of the bios are going to come up as well. I'll start with Dale. So Dale, I have to say that you have created a very poor representation of retirement, because according to your own bio, it says retired Medtronic 2006 after 24 years. So that didn't do you very well. Then he stepped into the role 6 through 14, President CEO of Life Science Alley Bio Business Alliance. Sometimes it's called Medical Alley. And then he moved into a role with Destination 2025. I know you're going to talk about that, and a number of different things. But we had initially met when you were at Medtronic. So thank you for joining us. Frank. So I already mentioned he played an amazing role in going from not having an innovation center in medical devices to making it happen, along with others that I mentioned. I met Frank. I was doing some activities with the University Senate and met him through that. And I knew that he had these great vision for academic health center, including all the buildings that are over behind us that weren't there at that time. And I thought, well, if we have this vision, if Frank says this is a go, then we have a chance. If he doesn't, then I'll go back and teach. And Frank, I got two sentences into my pitch, and he finished it for me. So I forever appreciate that. And you can see that he's had some significant positions here at the university. And Stephanie, I think we met through maybe Paul Rothweiler through the Plastic Society or something like that originally. Yes. She's ahead of everything. So she was ahead of everything at Abbott. Now she's the head of everything at Boston Scientific. Wonderful friend of the Bakken Medical Devices Center. And she's very kind. One year I had a master's student that didn't have support. And I don't know if you remember, but you sponsored her. So we're both grateful for that. So this is our panel. And so we've actually planned this. Hopefully it comes out that way. So I'm going to ask some questions and then relax. And my first one is for Dale. So, your perspective to me is unique because you've been in a high level in the industry. You've been in the trade organization here. You've led on a national, international level. I think we went to Japan several times together and things like that. So sort of setting our stage for the rest of the talk, back 25 years ago, what did the industry environment look like?
Well, thank you, Art. And thanks for giving me a chance to be here. This has been like Old Home Week, a lot of old faces I hadn't seen for a very long time. This is great. So going back 25 years ago, I had to kind of look into some of my numbers because I knew this room is filled with engineers and technical people, and it would like data to back up some of the things I'm about to say. But the industry, the medical device industry specifically we're talking about now, has gone through many ups and downs and periods of harsh realities. But 25 years ago was a special time. It was a time when the relationship between the regulatory bodies, specifically the FDA, and the industry was at an all-time low. And when I left Medtronic and I moved into Life Science Alley, I spent about, there was a period of time there when I spent about 30% of my time helping companies figure out how to move out of the country to get to an international location where they could get approval and they could work. And that was, it was a hard time. It was very, very dysfunctional, and it was filled with a lot of litigation and a lot of, like it always is, but especially at that time. And it was difficult. And what was happening is we as a country were losing jobs, and we're losing companies. The Minnesota climate, and many of you probably didn't know that at that time we had what's called an employment index of about 3.3. The national level of employment density as a baseline is 1. So we were about 330% more dependent on the medical device industry for our local economy than what the nation was at large. At that time, we were number 2, oddly enough, right behind Utah, but just right behind Utah. And we were also losing jobs. Our employment density dropped from about 3.2 down to 2.5, and we lost about 15.2% of our jobs in that time frame between 1997 and 2002. So it was just a rough time. And for those of you who were around back then, you might remember that there was a lot of news releases on the local paper about layoffs. So that was reality when this organization, this conference was formed. We'll get to that later.
Thank you very much, Dale. So sort of building on that, Stephanie, and you've had the privilege of not going to the dark side, staying in industry the whole time. So back 25 years, you know, how did you compete and return value to the stakeholder? What was missing? Was there access to emerging technology? Things like that. Can you speak about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think, you know, going back 25 years ago, I was much younger, first and foremost, right? Engineer. And I was at St. Jude Medical, and I had the opportunity, actually. It was kind of fun to see Dr. Lillehei up there, but I got to sit in a room with him and him going through napkin sketches of heart valves and how we should design the next heart valve. So kind of brought a lot of memories back. Thank you for that. In terms of the industry itself 25 years ago, it was all about innovation. What is the next area of innovation for us, right? We were doing surgical valves, and how do we get into percutaneous heart valves? What is that next space that we needed to chase? And so that answers the first part of your question. I think the challenges are similar and different because I think technologies are evolving so much today in how they are system level, have hardware, software, et cetera. Back then it was more implant, catheter, et cetera. But we needed to understand how to do models, right? I mean, Visible Heart Lab. People needed to understand the heart itself and the training around the heart itself. Look at, again, the conferences and, you know, anatomy and physiology course here at the U. I think those were big things for engineers in Minnesota to really help to build the second part of that. And so those are really what I think were big things that we need to continue to build on those.
Yeah, so Frank, again, back in that time frame, what was going on at the university, good or bad, or even?
Is it on? I got to give you a metaphor. When I came along, Art threw me a ball, and I caught it. And the problem with that is, once you catch a ball like that, you got to do something with it. And it's got to move forward. And that was what was happening at the university. There were 3 levels that began to advance this movement. One is within health sciences, one was between health sciences and engineering, and the third was the university level promoted by President Brunix and his staff. This resulted in 3 things. I like threes. One is interdepartmental, interschool partnerships that emphasize that the cooperative work of the health disciplines for the health of the people of Minnesota. This was a prime goal. Examples, translational science, the NIH awarding of the Center for Translational Science. This was a multi-million-dollar grant that began to bring some glue to this together. Innovation in devices and pharmaceuticals, providing new treatment and management strategies and therapeutics, and improving the student, resident, fellow education experiences across the entire state of Minnesota. Number 2, partnerships for development of devices and delivery systems between health sciences, mainly the medical school at this point, but it blossomed, and engineering. First on the list, DMD. Second, development of devices for the management of things like liver disease, heart disease, actually began to happen, as did partnerships with the device industry as it was developing, along with a lot of other community relationships in the private sector. And thirdly, university-level promotion of technology transfer and commercialization, space and resources for technology development, incubators, development of policies and procedures to support the efforts. And I'll mention one, conflict of interest. Became a real issue as this began to evolve and move ahead, and the evolving culture of innovation.
Yeah, so part of the technology transfer was MNIP, right? So this is an innovation partnership that really changed things at Minnesota. That is, if you wanted to do a sponsored project, the typical way is you do the project and then you argue with the university, the lawyers get together and decide how much to pay here and there. So the concept came up is, well, why don't we, because so many never go the whole 9 yards. You know, you get to, so the idea is that you would pay up front 10%. And I know for the Bakken Medical Devices Center, that changed everything. We, for example, with Boston Scientific, I think we had 35 appendices to our original agreement for MNIP. And the amazing thing is that then everybody's on the same side of the table. If you know eventually at the end of the project that you're going to fight over who owns what, versus you're already partners, it's a world of difference. So then everybody brings all their resources to the table. So that's been incredible. I know there's some tech transfer people here. Raise your hand. Yep, we got some over here. So yeah, so that was a big part of it. So back to Dale. So as we're starting to move forward from those darker messages, what next?
Well, about 2002, right in that time frame, is when the whole community, the whole ecosystem was getting really nervous. The senators, legislators, all the legislators, the university, as Frank has already alluded to, the private sector was moving and was talking about that. Some of the key leadership in the private sector were really hammering on the governor at the time that the state needed to do something. So what happened was the governor reached out to Don Gerhardt, who was the then CEO, president CEO of what was called Medical Alley, later to become Life Science Alley, later to become Medical Alley again. So we're all talking about the same organization when we say that. But anyway, and they together then kicked off what became known as, ultimately known as the Biobusiness Alliance of Minnesota, which was an organization that was targeted at trying to focus the ecosystem, all aspects of the ecosystem, on a common outcome, which is saving and growing the industry. So it was a team that was, or it's an organization rather, that was targeted to try to work closely with academia, with industry, and with state and local governments. And to try to, and what had happened, of course, because things were not going well, is many people in this room and many people across the state were starting organizations, starting projects, starting activities to try to make things better. All of those were good. Some of them were contrary to each other. I had conflicting outcomes on their lists. So the effort became focused on trying to create a common vision for where the state could be going. And that was developed with the support of Deloitte and about 1,000 people from across the state, two of which are sitting, one on my right here, Dr. Frank Serra, and President Brunix over on my left, were key contributors in making the university system available and reaching out to other aspects of our higher education system to also get engaged. And to make a very long story short, it became known that document, which if you ever want to see it, just give me a call. It's only 1,600 pages long, but I do have it in e-version, and I can get it to you if you want it. But it is a 20-year vision roadmap for the state of Minnesota. It was behind the scene. Most people didn't even know it existed, but it was guiding the state, especially some legislators and some of the activity that helped some of the activity at the University of Minnesota to kind of create where do we want to be. And there was just a lot going on, and it was an exciting time. And I want to call out and again make a recognition to the University of Minnesota for all the activities, the Visible Heart Lab, the Medical Devices Center. The list is long, and I'm sure Frank will cover more of that in his comments. But it also was the starting in the time frame of the DMD. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute, but this conference became a critical aspect of all of that, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Thanks, Dale. That's a nice lead-in. I'll turn to Stephanie now. So you've been at a number of conferences. What do you think the contribution has been of DMD in your viewpoint?
Yes, so I think DMD has been a very important conference for engineering, right, and the industry. And as you guys all have said earlier, how everyone comes together and starts to collaborate and leaves their company behind them and comes to solve problems and find solutions. And so that's what I've found over the years with DMD, that's been really important to me and the industry.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to talk about this, you know, after a 25-year perspective here. Dale, you want to continue on that same topic? Yeah. You're next. Yeah.
All right. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. So the DMD, in the role that it played, is that it became, for us, the go-to place to consolidate information. As I mentioned, there were literally hundreds of meetings and groups out there working on the ecosystem to try to make it better. But the one place, one time a year, where everybody came together, and the University of Minnesota and the DMD committee made it possible for us to bring, for all the people who were part of those teams, to bring that information to one site, one location. Everybody could hear it. They could figure out how to get involved, figure out what role they could play. And it became the heart and center of the communication process and the sharing of understanding within the state. and it was beyond impactful. And again, since you're high-tech people, between 1997 and 2007, which is the last data I have on that, the R&D level, the index for measure of our investment in R&D went up 54%, whereas it had declined 15% between 1997 and 2002. We had added about 4,500 jobs to the state of Minnesota in a time frame when the country was still losing jobs. And the only other state in the union that didn't lose medical device jobs in that time frame was Wisconsin. But if you move the border of Minnesota another 10 miles to the east, Wisconsin lost jobs too. So this became the center of that, and the consolidation during that 2008, 2009 time frame, this became a very important place globally. And in that same time frame, the index I mentioned to you before about the employment index, we went from a 2.5 to a 3.3, and I'd add that by 2011, which is the last time I saw the data for that, we were up to 3.85. So we're almost 4 times more concentrated on this industry in the state of Minnesota than the rest of the country. So that was, it was, I want to repeat, the DMD, I don't think the importance of it can be overstated because the DMD became the place where we all came. Otherwise, it was meeting after meeting after meeting of small groups. And this was a consolidation, and I just cannot thank Art and the team and the university for pulling this all together. And I think I have a bunch of other numbers if anybody wants them, but the one thing I'll close with is that for me at the national level, because Art asked me to cover that a little bit, there was one major activity that happened here locally. It started right at that speaker's booth and actually became a commitment right outside those swinging doors there on the sidewalk. And that was the second time, I believe, or maybe it was the first time, I don't recall, when Dr. Jeff Shuren, who headed CDRH for the FDA, came to speak here. And Art had arranged it that we could meet with him afterwards and before. And out of that came an organization which is known as Medical Device Innovation Consortium. And if you are unaware of that, Google it. It became a behind-the-scene massive organization, covers the nation now nationally, moved from its first 2 years in Minneapolis to now it's in Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. But it is focused on making sure that regulatory science becomes the basis by which devices are reviewed and approved within the state, within the country. And it has taken a lot of the anger that existed between the industry and the regulatory system and has made now again the United States the go-to place for many other countries to try to get their products to market versus the other way around. And it played a big role at the national level, and it started right there. And it was a very something that the nation owes the University of Minnesota and the DMD a great deal of gratitude for what they did. So thank you, Art.
Yeah, you know, you come to conferences and somebody from FDA or NIH, they come out with their canned talk and then they leave. And you get some good information about that. This was very different. So Jeff Shuren was coming in, and so I asked Jeff, I said, well, how are you getting to the university? He said, well, I'll take a taxi. And I'm thinking, oh, I should pick him up. Well, but I can't. So then I called Dale. I said, you know, that's wasted time. That's 25 minutes that you can spend with the director of CDRH. So that started it, and then it continued later. And what we found is this guy is genuine. He really wants to solve healthcare problems, and it just started a relationship at such a different level. That was so cool to happen. Stephanie, based on what you've heard, what's ahead of us, you think?
Well, I mean, I've been up here listening and thinking a lot about what's next for DMD, and I see some new faces out there, but I don't think I see enough new faces out there. So I think something that everybody here should consider is, I'm sure you have a survey after this, is put your ideas on there. What do you want to hear? Make this your conference. Volunteer. That's what's going to go next, right? And when we think about what's next for devices, in my opinion, and for innovation in general, it's connected devices, right? There's really not a whole lot out there anymore that's, I said this earlier, like, hey, this is a heart valve. It's electrophysiology. It's pulse field ablation, right? We used to have ablation catheters with RF energy that ablated, that could go 3 millimeters, but they had a lot of adverse events. And so now the latest is pulse field ablation. Safer for the patients, better for the physicians, et cetera. So I think we should be thinking about things like that. Or, you know, everybody hears the buzzword AI. Sometimes I cringe when I hear that, by the way. But I do think there's places for that. I think there's a lot of physicians that are overwhelmed with paperwork in our whole environment and health infrastructure today. And so I think about how can we as device companies make that easier and make it faster and better. So for example, at Boston Scientific, and this is the only Boston Scientific plug I have today, we came up with an intravascular imaging system software using AI that's called automatic lesion assessment. And what that does is it gives the physician a full vessel view if you're doing a complex PCI, where they can know where they need to place that stent within a couple of minutes. Well, actually probably 30 seconds, because 2 minutes would be way too long for the physician. But things like that are what we should start thinking about, I think, at a conference like this, and talking about and saying, how are we going to be better with connected devices? And then one last thing I'll leave you with is, I don't know how many people have heard about Truveta database or real-world evidence, and how that's going to come into the device industry and hopefully help us with all of the burden of clinical trials while still having patient safety at the forefront of our mind. So those are the things I'd like to see here personally, and so please, everybody, put what you want to see on that list. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Steph. So I'm going to make a short comment and then ask Frank to sort of wrap up some ideas, and then it's your turn. So if the folks with microphones can go around, and you can direct your question to anybody on the panel. What a fantastic group we have here. So what's really cool is that we have lots of folks that have lots of gray hair or no gray hair at all, and we have lots of young folks. And sometimes the young folks are a little bit shy. Do not be shy. Walk up to people, ask, you know, make friends. We all enjoy chatting with people. There's lots of us here that enjoy mentoring and things like that. So this is a good place to really catch up and accelerate your knowledge. And you can get a little information from panels like this, but you know, the best is just go up and ask people. So Frank, you want to wrap us up in this section?
I have to tell a story. When I came here in '81, I was a general surgeon, critical care doc, and that's what I did 24 hours, 7 days a week. One day, I walked by a school that said School of Public Health, and I said, what's that? And I found out what that was. And then as career developed and research developed, and I did a lot of mass spectroscopy to follow isotopes in metabolic pathways. I came to this conference, and I sat next to somebody by happenstance who happened to be in the engineering school. And we got talking about mass spectroscopy, and he says, come to my lab. So I said, okay. I went over to his lab, and understand the mass spectroscope I was using would fill half of this stage. He took me over, and he gave me this thing that's about the size of my thumbnail, and he says, that's my mass spectroscope. It taught me a lesson about what I needed to do to cross Washington Avenue, both for myself and people interested in developing technology. Second testimony I'll give you, I was just saying, this last technology that you were talking about cured my atrial flutter 5 years ago. And it didn't take very long. But the problem was, whatever they gave me, I think it was fentanyl, boy, it felt good.
But you felt
Anyway.
a heck of a lot better after?
Anyway, I have 4 things I'd like to use to summarize what I think has happened today. One is thank you for all of your interest and support and commitment. It's about people, it's about commitment, it's about vision and values. And that's what DMD, I think, started rolling along here, and it's just amazing to have watched it. The second is the progress over the last 25 years, to me, is a good illustration of the success that cooperative teams and individual commitments, in this case among the university, industry, and state and local government, can really do a lot to move ahead the health of the nation. And that's what we're really both about, just in different ways. The last thing I would say, the second to last, is we are all benefiting from living longer and healthier. I mean, I'm 83, man. Anyway, and then Art, I want to really give you a special thanks and a big hand clap for your leadership, energy, and commitment. Thank you.
So if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. Also, for the VIPs here and for the DMD award winners, we want to take some pictures up here afterwards, so come up to the stage. But
No.
no.
Here, take mine.
Not as simple as ultrasound.
Oh, not at all. So hello, everyone. Hubert, Director of Earl Bakken Medical Device Center, taking over for Art Erdman. It's very fascinating to learn about the history. I also did not know a lot of those pieces in Minnesota and Bakken's history in DMD. One of the things you said, Dale, that's interesting is in 2001, there was this kind of dark cloud over regulatory and the industry. Nowadays, I feel that there's a lot of collaboration and a lot of positivity with FDA and the industry and academia as well, but we've kind of entered a different kind of cloud, which is a more liability-centric, contractual requirement cloud. And so, for example, you know, when you think about running clinical trials in the US, there's a lot of infrastructure, but there is a lot of steps you need to do to get the clinical trial going, and I would say a 40-page informed consent document is more about liability than it is about the patient's protection sometimes. So thinking about a different kind of cloud, what would be the panel's suggestion for where we go? Because this is not so much that there's kind of tension between these entities, it's more of, I would even say, a cultural kind of situation in the US, where in other countries there's innovation happening at faster rates for these kind of translational technologies. So this is a challenging question, but I want to see your thoughts about it.
I'm going to challenge you back, Hubert,
Yeah.
because
Please do.
there's this big thing called EU MDR that pretty much wrecked. I mean, Europe used to be significantly faster than the US in innovation prior to implementing that. I hear they're walking it back now. I don't know if that will really happen or not, but I actually think we're going faster, but I do hear you with the contracting and other things. I think we have to find ways, and that's why I brought up this real-world evidence. I think we have to partner, and you have the FDA here, with the FDA to understand how can we leverage that better? How can we go faster? How can the US continue to drive innovation? I don't know. Dale, Frank?
I have one comment. I've done over 200 multi-center clinical trials worldwide in my academic career and grew up as the stairway of clinical trials developed. I said going up, it didn't go up, it just got more complicated. And the paperwork got more complicated, and the 40-page consent form was not, it happened. What I look at that cloud and I say, without clinical trials, what you develop, we can't use. And it's got to be made easier. And one of the horizons to me is AI and how you actually apply it in the environment of clinical trials. It's a major obstacle to me.
We have
Well,
time for more. I'm sorry. Go ahead. So.
To make a quick comment, I'm theoretically retired, so I'm not current on the state of everything, but I am engaged to some level, and I would make two comments. One is, I wish the law school here would put together a degree program around simplification of the legal requirements of a clinical study trial, because it is ridiculous. And the second point I'd make is and this is now speaking from recent personal experience, that having had a granddaughter that was enrolled in 5 clinical trials as the last effort to keep her alive, and the lack of humanity in that process is overwhelming when you're engaged in it. And it's something that needs to be addressed. And it's, so I'm with you 100% that is in need of repair. Because, one more comment on that. In the last few years, I've been involved in that area a little bit at a personal level, like I said. And I met a lot of parents who were going through this with their children, in this case. None of them understood what they were signing. Not one, except my daughter, who happens to work in the clinical environment. But it's a really complicated issue.
Wow, this audience, I thought there'd be more questions. Do we have one? Good. There's a mic right there. Push the button. Speak loud.
I think it's... I can hear you.
Yeah.
My question is about academic founders. There are several people in the audience who are academics that have developed medical devices. My question is about what are your advice for those academics that want to develop a medical device and create a startup and work with medical device companies on that?
Just to repeat the question, just so that make sure everyone understands it, is he is really interested in, he's academic today and interested in starting a medical device company. Did I get that right?
Yes.
And so, what could we do for him to help? Or what advice would you have? Do either of you guys want to go first, or? Okay, I guess I won. I would say file IP. Make sure you're in a great position before you get going, and then, start to think about all of the resources that we have, I think, whether it's at the university or in Minnesota, to start helping you prototype, get a good, solid prototype, and then go get some money from someone. That's a simple answer. I don't know about you guys.
One thing The only thing I would add to that is if you're just getting started and you don't know the market size and you don't understand the clinical need exactly, that's really critical. And there are resources here at the University of Minnesota that you can tap into for that, as well as, of course, people on the outside. But there are programs here that I've used a couple times with startups I've been involved with, and they've done a really good job of kind of laying out criteria in helping you to understand the clinical applicability and the like.
Yeah, come to the Bakken Medical Devices Center. There's a lot of help on campus. There's money you can apply for. ODOT is one program if you have a good idea. Also through tech transfer, if you need advice. There's a lot of people that have good experience here. Come talk to the fellows, innovation fellows. So take advantage of all that. This is what we're all about, I think.
I would add one other thing for that, and that's the Clinical Translational Science Initiative. They just are available. They're very applied. They'll add to the kind of information that you've been given. There's plenty of advice inside the university to get you going. I don't know how much money they'll give you, but you can come to that.
Maybe more than you have. Well, this has been a fantastic session. Thank you for sharing with us and our excitement about the development of the DMD conference. Hopefully, 25 years from now, there'll be still celebrations. And just one last comment. If you didn't come, there's no reason to have this conference. Really. If you don't participate, if you didn't send in papers and we have participate in student competitions and sponsors. If we didn't have all this, we wouldn't be able to do it. Just one last story. The first DMD conference, I got very happy to get awarded I think we got $35,000 to run a conference, so it was all free. And I said, well, maybe we could have some sponsors. And upstairs is, I'll say it a little bit lower, the foundation people said, you got to be kidding. Medical devices industry isn't going to give you any money. If you even get $1,000, I'll buy you a steak dinner. Well, he was wrong. I never got my steak dinner. But we raised as much, even in the first year, we had sponsorships. And through the years, thank you for doing that. It's a good lead-in because we've got 10, 12 minutes before the session start. And please visit our sponsors, say hi, say thank you for them, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.